Hello, welcome back to our channel, where we explore the world's deepest and most terrifying mysteries. Today, we have content that will send shivers down even the bravest spines. We're diving into real and supernatural stories that have happened and continue to happen in ordinary homes across various cities, with common people around the world. These are accounts of sinister shadows, malevolent presences, psychopaths, and paranormal encounters that defy all logical explanations. Get ready to hear stories that will mess with your mind and heart. From visions of spectral figures to chilling premonitions, these episodes will leave you questioning everything you think you know about life and death. Stories that will make you ponder what exists on the other side. Watch and draw your own conclusions. Warning: these stories are both real and fictional, told by our viewers, and may affect the minds of sensitive people. They were submitted by viewers, and if you have a story you'd like to share, please send it to us below in the comments. The cabin in the woods. Larissa and Gustavo were excited for the weekend. After months of work and intense studying, they finally had the chance to escape to a peaceful retreat. They found an isolated cabin in a dense forest, just a few hours away from the city. The place seemed perfect for relaxing and enjoying each other's company. When they arrived at the cabin, they were enchanted by its rustic beauty. The small, cozy cabin had a fireplace that promised warm nights despite the biting cold of the forest. After settling in, Larissa noticed that the cabin had a peculiar atmosphere, as if something was watching from every corner. Gustavo, however, dismissed the feeling, saying it was just the ambience of the place. On the first night, while they watched a movie wrapped in blankets, they heard noises coming from upstairs. Light but constant footsteps. Trying to stay calm, Gustavo went upstairs to check, but he found nothing. "Maybe it's just the house settling," he said, trying to reassure Larissa. The next day, they decided to relax even more, enjoying the cabin to completely disconnect. By late afternoon, Gustavo suggested going out to buy some wine and a pizza from the nearby town, about 30 minutes away by car. Larissa agreed, preferring to stay and take a hot bath. Alone, Larissa lay on the sofa with her phone, leisurely browsing social media. The tranquility of the place began to envelop her until it was abruptly interrupted by a loud, disturbing knock at the door. She jumped off the sofa, her heart racing. The knocking continued, rhythmic and insistent. Reluctantly, Larissa approached the door and asked in a trembling voice, "Who's there?" A hoarse, almost whispering voice responded from the other side, "Is Samantha there?" The name echoed in her mind, making no sense. "There's no one here by that name," she replied, trying to hide her panic. The knocking stopped, and for a brief moment, Larissa thought the person had gone away. But then the knocking started again, stronger and more frantic, as if whoever was on the other side was desperate to get in. She backed away, her hands trembling as she tried to call Gustavo, but the call wouldn't go through. Minutes passed like hours until suddenly everything went silent. The only sound was the rapid beating of her heart. When Gustavo finally returned, Larissa ran to him, recounting what had happened. He checked around the cabin but found no signs of anyone. "It must have been a misunderstanding," he said, but there was something in his eyes that suggested even he didn't believe his own words. That night, the couple decided to ignore the incident, trying to regain the peace they had planned. However, in the middle of the night, they were awakened by a deafening sound of breaking glass. Gustavo ran to the living room, where he found the kitchen window shattered. Before he could react, 3 masked figures emerged from the darkness and grabbed him. Larissa tried to run, but one of the figures caught her with force. Both were tied up and taken to the basement. The place, once just an abandoned storage room, now turned into a nightmare scene. The intruders didn't say a word, but their eyes, visible through the masks, were filled with cruelty. What followed was an indescribable torment. The masked men tortured them, both physically and psychologically, repeatedly mentioning the name Samantha, as if it were the key to some dark secret they needed to reveal. The agony seemed endless, but in a moment of the intruder's distraction, Gustavo managed to partially free himself. Fighting through the pain, he untied Larissa, and together, they escaped from the basement, running through the forest, stumbling and falling but never stopping. Dawn broke as they finally found help. Both were rushed to the hospital, where doctors were shocked by the condition they were in. They were alive, but forever marked by that night. Days later, as they recovered, Larissa received a call in her hospital room. The same hoarse voice from before whispered, "Is Samantha there?" She dropped the phone, the sound echoing through the empty room. The police never found the masked men, and the identity of Samantha remained a mystery. But one thing was certain, Larissa and Gustavo would never forget the terror of that night. And every time there was a knock at the door, even a light one, their hearts raced, as if the nightmare was far from over. The nighttime delivery Anna was excited to spend the evening with her nephew Lucas. His parents had gone out to dinner, leaving her in charge of taking care of him. They had fun watching cartoons and playing games, but soon they got hungry. Since her parents had left some money, Anna decided to order Chinese food, something they both loved. She picked up the phone and dialed the number of the restaurant she had quickly found online. After a few rings, someone answered on the other end. "Chinese restaurant?" Anna asked. "Depends on who's asking," responded a low, raspy voice. Anna felt a chill but ignored the discomfort and placed the order: spring rolls, kung pao chicken, and fried rice. The person on the other end repeated the order, finishing with a sinister "We're on our way." The babysitter and the doll Clara was a 19-year-old girl, full of energy and enthusiasm, and she loved working as a babysitter in her spare time. When she was hired to take care of a 4-year-old boy named Lucas, she was thrilled with the opportunity. His parents, a friendly couple, gave clear instructions before leaving for their special night out. "Don't let him stay up late, and please avoid letting him talk to Teddy too late," said Lucas's mother, with a tone slightly more serious than usual. Clara found the request strange and casually asked, "Who is Teddy?" Lucas's father smiled tensely and replied, "He's his doll. Lucas says they talk before going to sleep." Clara didn't worry too much about it. Children have vivid imaginations, and a companion doll didn't seem out of the ordinary. After saying goodbye, the parents left, leaving Clara and Lucas alone in the large, quiet house. Dinner went smoothly. Lucas was a sweet and well-behaved child, and the evening seemed like it would be easy. After eating, Clara helped Lucas brush his teeth and took him to bed. That's when she saw Teddy for the first time. The doll was sitting on Lucas's bed, leaning against the headboard. It was a teddy bear, but with a strangely unsettling appearance. Its button eyes, deep and black, seemed to follow her as she moved around the room. Clara tried to ignore the chill that ran up her spine. "Time to sleep, Lucas. Remember what your parents said? No staying up late, and no talking to Teddy, okay?" Clara said, trying to sound firm but friendly. Lucas looked at Teddy with a serious expression before responding. "Teddy says he only talks when you're not looking. He gets mad if I don't talk to him." Clara felt a growing discomfort but forced a smile. "Teddy will be fine, let's sleep now, okay?" she said, tucking Lucas under the covers. Lucas finally closed his eyes, hugging Teddy tightly. Clara wished him good night and turned off the light, heading downstairs to watch TV and pass the time until the parents returned. But as soon as she sat down on the couch, things started to get strange. The silence in the house was oppressive. Clara tried to focus on the TV show, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She looked over her shoulder from time to time, just to make sure she was alone. Suddenly, she heard a soft noise coming from upstairs. It sounded like whispers, like a low conversation.
Clara froze.
She remembered what Lucas had said about Teddy talking when no one was looking. Trying to stay calm, Clara slowly climbed the stairs, each step creaking under her feet. When she reached Lucas's bedroom door, she stood still, listening carefully. The whispers had stopped, but the air in the room felt heavier, denser. Gently pushing the door open, Clara entered the room and saw Lucas sleeping peacefully, still holding Teddy. Everything seemed normal. She sighed in relief, but as she turned to leave, a low, distinct whisper broke the silence. "Aren't you going to say goodnight?" Clara spun around, her heart racing, but the room was completely silent. Lucas continued to sleep, but now Teddy was sitting upright, staring at her with those empty fixed-button eyes. She tried to push away the feeling of panic, thinking she might be imagining things. She decided to go back to the living room and wait for Lucas's parents to return, trying to ignore the whispers that still echoed in her mind. When Clara returned to the living room, she found the TV off, even though she was sure she had left it on. She tried to turn it on again, but the device didn't respond. Suddenly, all the lights in the house went out, plunging her into total darkness. Clara was paralyzed for a moment, panic rising in her chest. She heard light, quick footsteps running down the upstairs hallway, followed by a low, sinister laugh, as if someone was mocking her. She ran back to Lucas's room, her heart pounding in her chest. When she entered the room, the lights flickered back on. Lucas was standing on the bed, still hugging Teddy, but now his eyes were open, fixed on her. "Teddy said you shouldn't have left us alone," Lucas said in a voice that seemed strangely mature for a child. Clara didn't know what to do. Lucas's gaze seemed distant, and now Teddy was sitting in the center of the bed, staring directly at her. Before she could react, Lucas smiled, a smile that didn't match the sweet boy she had met earlier. Suddenly, the bedroom door slammed shut, and Clara felt an invisible force pushing her out, locking her in the hallway. She tried to open the door, but it was locked from the inside. On the other side, she could hear Lucas's voice, or maybe Teddy's, whispering softly. "Good night, Clara."
Lucas's parents returned home about an hour later, finding Clara sitting in the hallway, pale and trembling. She tried to explain what had happened, but all she could say was that something was wrong with Teddy. Lucas's parents exchanged worried looks, but when they opened the bedroom door, they found Lucas sleeping peacefully, with Teddy by his side. Nothing seemed out of place. Clara never returned to that house again. And when the parents later tried to question Lucas about what had happened, he simply smiled and said, "Teddy said she won't be coming back." The parents never found out what really happened that night. And whenever they passed by Lucas's room, they felt an inexplicable chill, as if someone or something was watching, waiting for the next moment to show itself again. After about 30 minutes, the doorbell rang. Anna rushed to the door, money in hand. When she opened it, she saw a strange man, tall and thin, wearing a dark jacket with a hood that partially hid his face. He held a paper bag with the restaurant's logo. "Here's your order," he said with a smile that seemed forced. Anna handed over the money, and as she turned to get the change, she heard the door close behind her. When she turned back, the man was gone, but the food was on the dresser, exactly where he had left it. Thinking the delivery man had rushed off to his next delivery, Anna grabbed the food and went to the living room to eat with Lucas. After they finished, she put the boy to bed, and he quickly fell asleep. Still a bit uneasy, Anna decided to call her boyfriend, Felipe and invite him over to spend some time with her. She wanted company since the night had taken on a strange tone since the phone call. Felipe readily agreed and said he would be there in a few minutes. While waiting, Anna started tidying up the kitchen. Suddenly, the sound of the blender turning on by itself echoed through the house, making her jump in fright. She ran to the kitchen, but when she arrived, the appliance was off, as if nothing had happened. Scared, Anna returned to the living room, trying to convince herself that she was just imagining things. A dense fog began to form outside, obscuring the view of the garden. The atmosphere felt suffocating, but she tried to stay calm, counting the minutes until Felipe's arrival. Finally, the doorbell rang, and Anna opened the door for her boyfriend. Relieved, she hugged him and told him about the strange occurrences. Felipe, trying to calm her down, said it was probably nothing and suggested they watch a movie to relax. They sat on the couch, and in the midst of laughter and kisses, they heard a loud noise from upstairs, like something heavy falling to the floor. Anna and Felipe exchanged worried glances. They thought of Lucas, but when they went upstairs to check, they found the boy sleeping peacefully. Nothing seemed out of place, except for the slightly open closet door. Not finding anything strange, they went back downstairs to the living room, but now the tension in the air was palpable. They decided to turn on the TV and try to distract themselves, but Anna couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then they heard footsteps coming down the stairs, followed by a low, metallic sound, like a knife being dragged along the handrail. Felipe froze and Anna stood still, her eyes fixed on the darkness of the hallway. From the depths of the shadows, a figure slowly emerged. It was the delivery man, still wearing the hooded jacket, but now holding a long, sharp knife in one hand. His face was partially visible, revealing a distorted smile and eyes filled with malice. Anna tried to scream, but fear paralyzed her. Felipe stepped forward, trying to protect Anna, but the man was quick, delivering a blow that knocked him to the ground, screaming in pain. Desperate, Anna ran to the kitchen, trying to find something to defend herself with. The delivery man calmly followed her, as if enjoying the game. She grabbed a kitchen knife, trembling, ready to defend herself. But when she turned around, the delivery man was already in front of her, the knife raised for the final strike. Suddenly, the lights went out, plunging the house into complete darkness. Anna heard quick footsteps and then a muffled scream. The sound of something falling to the floor echoed through the hallway, followed by silence. The lights came back on, revealing Felipe standing, panting, holding a bloodied pan. The delivery man lay on the floor, unconscious or dead, blood dripping from the side of his head. Anna ran to Felipe, both trembling. They called the police, who arrived quickly. As the officers searched the house, they found evidence suggesting that the man had been planning the invasion for days, watching them from afar. However, when they examined the body, they found nothing that could identify the man. He carried no documents, not even a phone. When they asked the Chinese restaurant about the delivery, they discovered that the number Anna had dialed did not belong to them. It was an unknown number. As the police took the body away, one of the officers found something in the paper bag left on the dresser, a small porcelain doll with a sinister smile, its fixed eyes staring at Anna. She had never seen that doll before. Anna and Felipe survived, but the fear of that night never left them. And the mystery of the true delivery man remains, leaving the feeling that he is still out there, waiting for his next victim.
The party at Bianca's house. It was a quiet night in the small, peaceful town of Valverde. The kind of place where nothing extraordinary ever happened, and life followed its serene, almost monotonous rhythm. However, that night, Bianca's house was far from tranquil. In celebration of the countdown to graduation, she decided to throw a party for her closest friends. It would be the last big celebration before everyone went their separate ways. Bianca's house was a large mansion she had inherited from her grandparents, located at the end of an isolated street, surrounded by tall trees and a hedge that kept it hidden from prying eyes. It was the perfect place for a private party, without the worry of disturbing the neighbors. Friends began to arrive shortly after sunset. Loud music, laughter, and lively conversations filled the air as the house came to life with colorful lights and the contagious energy of young people eager to bid farewell to their school days. As the night wore on, the party became wilder. Some of the teens were already feeling the effects of alcohol, while others were busy taking photos and making videos to capture the moment. The energy was electrifying, and no one noticed when the first strange thing happened. Anna was the first to notice. She was upstairs in one of the bedrooms when she heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. Thinking it was just one of the friends, she called out a name but got no response. She felt a chill run down her spine but shrugged it off, thinking she was just being paranoid. She returned to the party without giving it much thought. A few minutes later, the living room lights started to flicker. Laughing, Bianca said it was just a power surge and urged everyone to keep having fun. But then, one of the light bulbs exploded with a sharp pop, scattering shards across the floor. The laughter died out, and an uncomfortable silence took over the room. "That was weird," said Lucas, Bianca's boyfriend, trying to calm everyone's nerves. Bianca decided it was best to check the circuit breaker. She grabbed a flashlight and headed to the basement, but as she descended the stairs, she felt as if something was watching her. The basement was dark and stuffy, and the only sound was her footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. When she reached the circuit breaker, everything was in order. No sign of an electrical problem. But as she turned to go back upstairs, she heard a low, unintelligible whisper. The flashlight flickered once before going out completely. Bianca stood still for a moment, her heart racing, and then ran back to the living room where the others were waiting. "The circuit breaker is fine, but something strange is happening," Bianca said, panting. Before anyone could respond, the front door slammed shut, followed by a loud thud from upstairs, as if something heavy had been dropped. "Who's up there?" asked Marcos, visibly worried. No one answered. A sense of unease began to grow among the group. Someone must be playing a prank. "Let's check it out," suggested Lucas, trying to sound confident. They climbed the stairs, each step heavy and tense. They reached the hallway and saw that one of the doors was slightly ajar. When they pushed the door open, the bedroom light was on, but no one was there. The window, which had been closed earlier, was now open, the curtains swaying gently in the cold night breeze. "This is starting to freak me out," said Julia, gripping Anna's arm. Suddenly, the bedroom door slammed shut with a bang, locking them inside. The music in the living room abruptly stopped, leaving the house in eerie silence. "Someone's messing with us," shouted Marcos, trying unsuccessfully to open the door. Then they heard the sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs, as if someone was slowly coming up. The teens exchanged fearful glances, the terror growing in their eyes. No one knew what to do. "Who's there?" Lucas shouted, trying to sound authoritative, but the tremble in his voice betrayed him. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and everything went silent again. Then, a cold, unfamiliar voice whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Panic set in. Lucas and Marcos began to force the door open, while the girls retreated to the back of the room. Suddenly, the door swung open with a crack, throwing them back into the empty hallway. "Let's get out of here," Bianca yelled, grabbing Lucas's hand. They ran down the stairs, but when they reached the living room, all the doors and windows were locked. The only exit seemed to be the basement. "Let's go to the basement, there must be a way out there," suggested Julia, desperate. They descended into the basement, where darkness was nearly complete except for the faint light of a lamp in the corner. But as soon as they were all downstairs, the basement door slammed shut with a loud bang, trapping them once again. "What's going on?" shouted Marcos, pounding on the door. The lamp flickered and went out, leaving them in total darkness. It was then that they realized they were no longer alone. At the back of the basement, a tall, shadowy figure began to move slowly toward them. Its eyes, red like embers, glowed in the dark. "Who are you? What do you want?" Bianca screamed, her voice filled with terror. The figure paused for a moment, and then the cold voice they had heard earlier replied, "You're here because of me, and now you're going to pay." Suddenly, the figure disappeared, and the lights came back on. The basement door opened on its own, and they ran out, gasping and in a panic. When they reached the living room, everything seemed normal again. The doors were unlocked, the music was playing softly again, and the house was quiet. But something was wrong. The friends began to realize they were alone. The house was empty, with no sign of anyone else. When they tried to call Bianca's parents or anyone else, they discovered that the phones had no signal. It was then that Bianca noticed something frightening. All the photos in the house only showed her and her friends, as if no one else existed. The family photos, the graduation albums, everything had changed. Lucas, pale, looked at Bianca and said, "This can't be happening. We're not alone here." Suddenly, they heard the cold voice again, echoing through the walls. "You're mine now." And that's when they realized the terrifying truth. The figure that had been chasing them wasn't someone from the outside, but a manifestation of their own fears and sins. They were trapped in a cycle of psychological terror, where there was no escape, only the constant feeling of being hunted and desperate. The party, which had started as a celebration, turned into a never-ending nightmare, where the only thing left was the certainty that they would never leave that house, or the twisted reality they had created for themselves. The return home. Marta had always been a devoted mother, dedicating every free minute to her 4 children. They were the light of her life, and even during the tough days, her love for them never wavered. However, after a complicated surgery, she was forced to spend a few days in the hospital to recover. During her absence, her husband, Carlos, and a caregiver were responsible for taking care of the children and the house. When she was finally discharged and returned home, Marta expected to be greeted with warm hugs and laughter. But upon arrival, something felt off. The house, which had always been full of life, was eerily quiet. The curtains were drawn, blocking out the daylight, and the air felt heavy, as if something was lurking in the dark corners. Carlos helped her settle into bed in the master bedroom. He was attentive, but there was a strange stiffness in his movements, as if he were playing a role that didn't suit him. Marta tried to ignore the feeling, attributing it to her own post-surgical vulnerability. "Where are the kids?" she asked, eager to see her children. Carlos hesitated for a moment before responding, "They're in the living room playing. We didn't want them to disturb you while you rest." That response unsettled her. Her children would always run to her, especially after an absence. Even so, she accepted Carlos's suggestion, believing that her fatigue was clouding her judgment. In the days that followed, Marta began to notice strange behavior. Her children almost never came to her room, and when they did, they were apathetic, emotionless. They didn't hug her like before, didn't smile, and their eyes seemed vacant, as if something essential had been taken from them. One night, when the silence in the house became unbearable, Marta decided to get out of bed and go to the children's room. Carlos was sleeping soundly beside her, and she managed to get up without making a sound. Her legs were weak, but the need to see her children propelled her forward. As she walked down the dark hallway, a shiver ran up her spine. Every door she passed seemed to hide something, an invisible and threatening presence. When she finally reached the children's room, she slowly opened the door and peeked inside. The children were lying in their beds, but something was very wrong. They were motionless, their eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Marta was paralyzed for a moment, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. When she finally found her voice, she whispered, "My loves, what's happening?" No response. Marta approached each bed, trying to understand, but the children didn't react. Their bodies were cold to the touch, and their eyes, empty, reflected a deep darkness. Desperate, Marta began to shake each of them, calling their names, but there was no response. In her despair, she ran back to the bedroom to wake Carlos. When she entered, she found her husband sitting on the bed, staring at her as if he had been waiting. The smile on his face was not one of comfort, but of something disturbingly wrong. "What did you do to them?" Marta cried, tears beginning to roll down her face. Carlos didn't answer immediately. He simply stood up, slowly walking towards her, that sinister smile still on his face. "They're fine, Marta. They're just resting," he said in a low, cold voice. Marta backed away, terror settling into her heart. Something was terribly wrong, and she felt reality around her starting to unravel. But before she could react, Carlos grabbed her by the shoulders, pulling her back to the bed. "You need to rest too," he whispered, forcing her to lie down. Marta tried to fight back, but her weak, injured body couldn't resist. The last thing she saw before Carlos turned off the light was the reflection of the room in the mirror. The children were there, standing in the doorway, watching her, their empty eyes fixed on her. When she woke up the next morning, Marta was bound to her bed, her hands tied with leather straps. She tried to scream, but her voice was weak, and her throat ached. Carlos entered the room with a look of false concern, carrying a tray of breakfast. "You need to rest, my love. Everything will be fine," he said, as if nothing was wrong. In the days that followed, Marta was forced to stay in bed, unable to see her children. She heard footsteps in the hallway at night, and sometimes, low whispers that seemed to come from every corner of the house. She knew something horrible had happened, but no one would tell her the truth. One night, when the silence was almost deafening, Marta heard a faint, almost imperceptible voice whispering beside her. "Mommy, help us." She quickly turned her head, but no one was there. Yet the voice continued, now clearer, and she realized it was coming from the mirror in the corner of the room. With difficulty, she dragged herself to the mirror, and what she saw made her heart stop. The reflections of her children were there, but not as she knew them. Their faces were distorted, their eyes black as night, and they looked at her with a mix of despair and anger. "Mommy, why did you leave us?" whispered one of the figures, with a voice that echoed through the room. Marta tried to respond, but before she could, Carlos entered the room. In the reflection, she saw that he was holding a knife. The smile on his face was now completely twisted, as if the man she knew was no longer there. "Let's end this, Marta. We need your soul too," he said, slowly advancing. Terror paralyzed Marta as Carlos approached. She tried to scream, but her voice failed. She looked at the mirror one more time and saw her children watching, as if waiting for something. But they didn't help. They just watched, their black eyes reflecting Marta's despair. That night, Marta became just another shadow in that house. When the police were called days later, they found Carlos downstairs, claiming his wife had gone mad and attacked their own children. But there was no sign of the children anywhere, and Carlos was taken to a psychiatric institution. Marta's house was abandoned, but those who passed by at night swore they could hear whispers coming from the darkened windows and see shadows of children watching from inside. And the mirror in Marta's room? They say if you look closely, you can still see the family, trapped forever in an endless nightmare. The Bride of the Dark Mansion. Joss had always dreamed of finding a great love, and when she met Arthur, a renowned and respected banker, she believed she had found the man of her dreams. They fell in love quickly, and within a few months, they were married. Arthur was charming, attentive, and offered Joss a life of luxury and security. For her, nothing else mattered, not even the fact that shortly after the wedding, they would move to Arthur's ancestral mansion, situated in a remote area surrounded by dense forests. When Joss saw the mansion for the first time, her heart filled with admiration and a slight unease. The building was imposing, a masterpiece of rustic architecture, with towers that seemed to touch the sky, arched windows, and a facade covered in ivy. Despite its beauty, there was something dark in the air around the mansion, something Joss couldn't quite define. But she was in love and decided to ignore the feeling. The mansion staff were few, but they were all strangely silent and avoided making eye contact with her. There was a butler named Gregory, a housekeeper named Mrs. Thatcher, and a middle-aged gardener who seemed to appear and disappear within the shadows of the garden. None of them spoke much, and their presence felt almost ethereal, as if they were more part of the mansion than real people. On the first night in the mansion, Joss was awakened by the soft sound of footsteps in the hallway. When she opened her eyes, she saw the bedroom door slightly ajar, even though she was certain she had closed it before going to sleep. She got up, but when she went to check, she found no one. Thinking it might have been Arthur, she returned to bed, trying not to be bothered. But things only got stranger as the days passed. She began to hear whispers, as if someone were speaking in a language she couldn't understand. The paintings hanging on the walls seemed to watch her, and at night, the shadows on the walls danced as if they had a life of their own. One afternoon, while exploring the library, she found an old diary hidden among the dusty books. It belonged to a woman named Evelyn, Arthur's first wife. The entries were filled with disturbing accounts of the mansion, describing it as a place of darkness and secrets. Evelyn mentioned the same kinds of strange events that Joss had been experiencing: whispers, footsteps in the hallway, and a constant presence she couldn't see but could feel watching her every moment. When Joss confronted Arthur about the diary, he simply laughed and said that Evelyn had been a fragile woman, prone to imagination, and that she had eventually succumbed to her own mind. But something about the way he spoke made her uncomfortable. Arthur was different, more distant, as if the mansion was changing him in some way. That night, Joss couldn't sleep. She felt suffocated by the secrets that seemed to pulse within the walls. She decided to leave the bedroom and explore the house in silence. She walked through the dark hallways, guided only by the faint moonlight streaming through the windows. She eventually came to a door at the end of a hallway that she had never noticed before. The door was slightly ajar, and on the other side, a narrow corridor led down to what seemed to be a cellar. Joss hesitated, but something pulled her to descend. When she reached the bottom, she found a room full of candles, all lit, with an altar in the center. On the altar was a large portrait of Evelyn, Arthur's first wife, staring directly at Joss with eyes full of sadness and something more, a warning. It was then that Joss heard footsteps. Turning around, she saw the mansion staff: Gregory, Mrs. Thatcher, and the gardener, all standing at the entrance of the room. They were motionless, their faces expressionless, but their eyes were fixed on her. Before she could ask what they were doing there, Arthur appeared among them, holding a candle. I told you not to worry about the past, Joss, he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. What is happening, Arthur? Who is Evelyn really? Joss asked, fear creeping up her spine. Arthur slowly approached, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the small room. Evelyn was my first wife, but the mansion, it demands more. It's not just a house, Joss. It's a place of power, and that power needs to be fed. Joss recoiled, horror gripping her. What did you do to her? She whispered, her voice trembling. Arthur stopped in front of the altar and looked at Evelyn's portrait. Evelyn didn't understand. She resisted. But you, Joss, you are special. The mansion has chosen you. Before she could react, the staff began to whisper in unison, words in an ancient language she couldn't comprehend. The candles around the altar flickered violently, and the room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in on her. Joss tried to run, but Arthur grabbed her firmly, his eyes now cold and empty like those of the staff. You never should have come here, Joss. Now you're a part of the mansion forever. The last thing Joss saw before losing consciousness was Arthur's distorted smile as the whispers of the staff filled the room, like a funeral dirge. When Joss awoke, she was back in her bedroom, but something was different. The sun shone through the window, but she felt a deep cold inside her. She tried to get out of bed, but her body wouldn't respond. It was as if she were trapped, not just physically but spiritually. Arthur entered the room, now wearing a caring expression, as if nothing had happened. Good morning, my dear. I hope you slept well. Joss tried to speak, but her voice was locked in her throat. She looked into the mirror beside the bed and, to her horror, saw that her reflection didn't match her. In the mirror, it wasn't Joss who looked back, but Evelyn's face, with eyes that pleaded for help. Arthur leaned in and whispered in her ear. Now you understand, don't you? The mansion always needs a lady, and when one is gone, another takes her place. And with that, he left the room, closing the door behind him. Joss tried to scream, but the voice inside her was no longer her own. She knew she was trapped in the mansion, just as Evelyn had been before her, condemned to live as a shadow within its walls while the dark cycle continued. Days later, the staff began preparing the house for what seemed to be a new event. A new party was being planned, and soon, a new young woman would arrive, enchanted by Arthur's charm, unaware of the dark fate that awaited her. And so the mansion would continue to live, feeding on its secrets, while the shadows on the walls laughed silently, waiting for the next victim. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like to support us. And more importantly, if you have any supernatural experiences, don't keep them to yourself. Write your story in the comments below. Share your encounter with the inexplicable, fuel the collective curiosity, and who knows, maybe together we can unravel these mysteries that linger like fog between the world of the living and the dead. Remember, the unknown is always lurking, just one story away. And now with nightfall, who knows what shadows might emerge from the darkness to whisper another true tale of terror.